I can still remember every student who ever sat in my classroom, every parent who trusted me with their child, but according to my daughter Claire, I had no real family worth inviting to my husband's funeral. The text message came 3 days after Robert died. I was sitting in our bedroom, surrounded by his clothes that still smelled like his cologne, trying to figure out how to plan a funeral when my whole world had just collapsed. My phone buzzed. Mom, I've been thinking about the funeral. Let's keep it small. Family only. Dad would have wanted it intimate and dignified. I'll handle the guest list. Family only. I stared at those words until they blurred. Robert had been a high school history teacher for 35 years. He'd coached debate teams, sponsored the chess club, mentored hundreds of students. He'd had colleagues, friends, neighbors who'd known him for decades. And Claire wanted to reduce his funeral to what? Her husband Derek, our son Nathan, and me? I called her. Claire, your father touched a lot of lives. People will want to pay their respects. Mom, I know you're emotional right now, but trust me on this. Big funerals are chaotic and exhausting. You don't need that stress. Just family. It's cleaner. Cleaner. Like my husband's life was something that needed to be tidied up and put away. What about his colleagues from school? His Thursday night poker group? The Hendersons next door. Mom, those people barely knew him. Not really. We're his family. We're the ones who matter. I wanted to argue, but I was so tired. Tired from 3 weeks of watching Robert fade in the hospice bed. Tired from making impossible decisions. Tired from crying until I had nothing left. So I said okay. I let her handle it. Claire took over everything. She chose the funeral home, picked out the casket, wrote the obituary. She made it clear that the service would be at 10 a.m. on Saturday, family only, brief and dignified. When I suggested we might want to include some of Robert's favorite music, she said it would make things run long. We're keeping it simple, Mom. Trust me. My name is Margaret Thorne, and I spent 40 years as a librarian. I've always been quiet, accommodating, the kind of person who avoids conflict. Robert was the outgoing one, the storyteller, the man who could make friends anywhere. After he retired 5 years ago, he'd become even more social, volunteering at the community center, helping international students practice English, mentoring young teachers. Claire had always been closer to me than to Robert. She thought he was too loud, too much, too willing to give his time to strangers. After she married Derek, a corporate attorney who measured everything in billable hours, she'd grown even more distant from her father. Their phone calls were perfunctory, her visits obligatory. Nathan tried to intervene. He called me 2 days before the funeral. Mom, Claire sent me the guest list. It's 8 people. 8. For Dad's funeral. She thinks it's what's best. It's not what Dad would have wanted. You know it's not. I did know. But I also knew I didn't have the energy to fight my daughter, while I was trying to figure out how to breathe without my husband. The morning of the funeral, I dressed in the black suit Robert had always said made me look distinguished. Claire had texted me instructions. Arrive at 9:30, service at 10, burial at 11, small reception at her house afterward. Efficient. Controlled. Everything Robert had never been. I got to the funeral home early. The director, Mr. Peterson, looked uncomfortable when he saw me. Mrs. Thorne, I wanted to mention we've had quite a few calls about the service. People asking about the time, whether they could attend. Your daughter was very clear about the family-only restriction, but I thought you should know there's been significant interest. How many calls? He hesitated. Over 40 in the past 2 days. 40 people who wanted to say goodbye to Robert, and Claire had shut them all out. Claire arrived at 9:30 sharp, Derek beside her in his $1,000 suit. She looked around the small chapel, nodded approvingly at the minimal flower arrangements she'd ordered. Perfect. This is exactly right. Dignified and simple. Nathan came in with his wife Amy and their 2 kids. He caught my eye, and I could see the anger in his face, but he didn't say anything. We were all too well trained in keeping the peace. At 9:50, Mr. Peterson approached Claire nervously. Miss Thorne, there are some people in the parking lot. They're asking if they can come in to pay their respects. I told them it was family only, but they've driven quite a distance and... Then they should have called ahead, Claire said crisply. The obituary clearly stated family only. Please ask them to leave. Claire, I started, but she cut me off. Mom, we talked about this. This is what's best for you. The service started at 10. The minister, who'd never met Robert, read from prepared remarks Claire had written. They were fine. Accurate. Completely devoid of anything that captured who Robert actually was. There was no mention of his terrible jokes, his passion for Civil War history, the way he'd learned conversational Spanish at 65 just so he could better help his ESL students. I sat in the front row and felt like I was attending a stranger's funeral. We were 15 minutes in when the door at the back of the chapel opened. Claire's head snapped around, irritation clear on her face. Mr. Peterson stood in the doorway, looking apologetic. I'm very sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who insists on being allowed in. She says she's family. Claire stood up. That's impossible. Everyone in the family is already here. She's quite insistent. Perhaps you could speak with her. Claire marched to the back of the chapel, Derek following. I could hear her voice, sharp and low, saying something about inappropriate timing and clear instructions. Then I heard another voice, accented and firm. I have every right to be here. Robert was my family. I stood up. I knew that voice. Claire came back down the aisle, her face flushed. Mom, there's a woman here claiming to be Dad's family. Some kind of scam artist probably. Derek's calling security. What's her name? I asked quietly. She says her name is Nguyen. My heart stopped. Let her in. What? Mom, no. We don't know this person. Let her in, Claire. Right now. Something in my voice made Claire step back. I walked to the back of the chapel and there she was. Nguyen, older than the last time I'd seen her. Her hair gray now, but her eyes the same. Standing beside her was a young man in his late 20s, tall and serious looking. Margaret, she said softly. I'm so sorry. I know we said family only, but Robert was family to us. This is my son, David. I hugged her, something I should have done years ago. I'm so glad you're here. Claire was behind me. Mom, who is this person? I turned to face my daughter. This is Nguyen. 28 years ago, she and her family came to this country as refugees from Vietnam. Your father sponsored them, helped them get settled, found them housing, taught on English. She became one of his closest friends. I've never heard of her, Claire said flatly. That's because you never asked about your father's life. You were too busy deciding it wasn't important enough for your attention. Untouched my arm gently. We don't want to intrude. I just wanted to pay respects. We can wait outside until the service is over. You're not waiting anywhere, I said. You're sitting with me. I led on and David to the front row. Claire stood frozen in the aisle. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. But I was done letting her control anything. Please continue, I told the minister. But I'd like to add something first. I walked to the podium. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. My daughter planned this funeral because she thought she was protecting me. She thought a small, quiet service was what I needed. But Robert didn't live a small, quiet life. He lived a large, loud, generous life. He gave his time to anyone who needed it. He made friends everywhere he went. And he would be horrified to know that people who loved him were turned away from his funeral. I looked at Claire. She was pale, Derek's hand on her arm. So I'm changing the plan. Mr. Peterson, please open the doors. Anyone who wants to say goodbye to Robert is welcome here. Mom, you can't, Claire started. I can and I am. This is still my husband's funeral, and I'm making the decisions now. Mr. Peterson nodded and opened the chapel doors. Within minutes, people started filing in. Robert's colleagues from school, some retired, some still teaching. His poker group, 5 men in their 70s who'd been playing cards together for 20 years. The Hendersons and the Chens from our street. Former students, some of them middle-aged now, with their own children. And they kept coming. The small chapel filled up, people standing along the walls, sitting in the aisles. I recognized faces I hadn't seen in years. A woman Robert had tutored in English who was now a doctor. A young man he'd mentored who'd gone on to become a teacher himself. The family he'd helped move into their apartment when they had nothing. Claire and Derek had retreated to a corner. Her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Nathan came up beside me. This is right, Mom. This is what Dad would have wanted. The service transformed. Instead of the sterile, scripted ceremony Claire had planned, it became a celebration. People stood up and shared stories. Robert's former principal talked about his dedication. A student spoke about how Robert had helped him get a scholarship to college. Anne told the story of how Robert had spent 6 months teaching her family English, helping them navigate a new country, treating them like family when they had no one. Robert told me once that family isn't just blood, Anne said, her voice breaking. Family is the people who show up for you, who see you struggling and reach out a hand. He was family to us. He saved our lives. I watched Claire's face as Anne spoke. She looked like she'd been slapped. The service lasted 2 hours. When it finally ended, the line of people waiting to offer condolences stretched out the door. Each person had a story, a memory, a piece of Robert I'd never known. A teacher he'd encouraged during her first difficult year. A student he'd helped through a family crisis. A neighbor he'd driven to medical appointments when she couldn't drive herself. Claire and Derek left before the burial. She didn't say goodbye, just walked out with her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling someone to complain about the disaster I'd created. At the cemetery, more than 100 people gathered around Robert's grave. The minister said a brief prayer, and then people started placing items on the casket. A chess piece from the club he'd sponsored. A small Vietnamese flag from Anne's family. A book of Civil War history from a former student. Tokens of all the lives he'd touched. Afterward, Nathan suggested we go to a restaurant instead of Claire's planned reception. 20 of us ended up at the Italian place Robert had loved, sharing stories and wine and laughter. Anne sat next to me and we talked for the first time in years. I tried to stay in touch, she said quietly. But your daughter made it clear I wasn't welcome. She said Robert was too busy for old friends, that he needed to focus on family. When was this? About 5 years ago, right after he retired. I called to invite him to David's college graduation. Your daughter answered, said Robert couldn't make it, that he had family obligations. I tried a few more times, but she always had a reason why he couldn't talk. Eventually I stopped calling. I thought maybe he didn't want to maintain the friendship anymore. I felt sick. Robert never knew you were calling, did he? Anne shook her head. I don't think so. When I saw the obituary I almost didn't come. But David insisted. He said he owed Robert everything, that we had to pay our respects even if we weren't wanted. You were always wanted. Robert talked about you all the time. He just thought you'd moved on, gotten too busy for old friends. We'd both been lied to. Claire had systematically cut Robert off from the people who mattered to him, and I'd been too oblivious to notice. I drove home that night exhausted but strangely at peace. The funeral had been chaotic and emotional and nothing like what Claire had planned. It had been perfect. My phone started buzzing around 9 p.m. text messages from Claire. What you did today was unforgivable. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Dad would have been horrified by that circus. I was trying to protect you and you threw it in my face. I didn't respond. What was there to say? The next morning, Nathan came over with coffee and bagels. Claire called me last night. She's furious. She says you've lost perspective, that grief is making you irrational. What do you think? He smiled. I think yesterday was the first time I've seen you stand up to her in years. I think Dad would have loved every minute of it. Over the next few weeks I started piecing together the full picture of what Claire had done. She'd been screening Robert's calls for years, telling people he was too tired or too busy. She'd convinced him that his friends had lost interest, that he was bothering people by reaching out. She'd isolated him, slowly and systematically, until his world had shrunk to just our immediate family. And she'd done it all in the name of protecting him. Protecting us. Making our lives simpler and cleaner. I found emails on Robert's computer. Messages from old friends that had gone unanswered, because Claire had changed his email password, to protect him from scammers. Invitations to reunions and gatherings that he'd never seen. A whole life he could have had if my daughter hadn't decided he didn't need it. I called Claire and asked her to come over. She arrived with Derek, both of them in business clothes like this was a negotiation. I want to understand, I said. Why did you cut your father off from his friends? I didn't cut him off. I managed his social obligations. He was retired, Mom. He didn't need to be running around playing everyone's therapist and mentor. He needed to rest, to focus on family. He needed to be himself. And you took that away from him. Claire's expression hardened. I made his life easier. I protected him from people who just wanted to use him. Do you know how many of those friends asked him for money over the years? How many took advantage of his generosity? That was his choice to make. It was a stupid choice. He gave away thousands of dollars to people who didn't deserve it. He exhausted himself helping strangers while his own family struggled. We never struggled, Claire. We had everything we needed. But we could have had more. If he hadn't been so busy saving the world, maybe he could have helped me and Derek with our business. Maybe he could have been there for his actual family instead of playing hero to people who forgot about him the second they didn't need him anymore. I stared at my daughter and saw a stranger. You didn't come to his funeral to say goodbye. You came to make sure it was small enough that you wouldn't have to face all the people whose lives he changed. All the evidence that he mattered to more people than just you. That's not fair. You told Nguyen that Robert was too busy for her. You kept them apart for 5 years. You robbed them both of that friendship because it didn't serve your purpose. Claire stood up. I don't have to listen to this. I did what I thought was best. No, you did what was easiest for you. You wanted a father who existed only for your benefit. And when he didn't fit that mold, you tried to remake him. At least I was here. At least I cared enough to help manage things when he got older. You were here to control things. There's a difference. Derek finally spoke. Mrs. Thorne, I think you're being unfair to Claire. She's been nothing but devoted to you and Robert. Devoted to controlling us, maybe. But that's not the same as love. They left. Claire didn't speak to me for 3 months. During that time, I reconnected with Robert's friends. I had lunch with Ann and David, heard about their lives, learned about everything Robert had missed. I went to a poker night and listened to his friends share stories. I attended a retirement party for one of his colleagues and realized how much of his life I'd been shut out of too. I'd been so focused on keeping peace with Claire that I'd let her isolate both of us. Nathan helped me sort through Robert's things. We found journals where he'd written about feeling disconnected from his friends, wondering why people had stopped calling. He'd blamed himself, thought he'd done something wrong. He died thinking he'd been forgotten. That was the hardest part. Knowing that Claire's interference had made Robert feel abandoned in his final years. I started a scholarship fund in Robert's name for first-generation college students. Ann helped me set it up, and we held a small ceremony at the high school where Robert had taught. More than 50 people came. Former students, colleagues, friends. People who remembered him and wanted to honor his legacy. Claire sent a text. I see you're still trying to make Dad into some kind of saint. He was just a teacher who couldn't say no to people. I didn't respond. 6 months after Robert's death, Claire called. Her voice was different, smaller. Mom, I need to tell you something. Derek and I are getting divorced. I'm sorry to hear that. He's been having an affair with his paralegal. For 2 years. Everyone at his firm knew except me. She paused. I feel like such an idiot. You're not an idiot. I thought I had everything under control. I thought if I just managed things carefully enough, made the right decisions, kept everything clean and organized, nothing bad could happen. But I couldn't control this. I heard the crack in her voice, the fear underneath the anger. Claire, you can't control other people. You can only control yourself. That's what your father understood. He gave freely because he knew he couldn't control the outcome. Only his own actions. I pushed him away, she said quietly. I pushed everyone away because I was afraid of being hurt or disappointed or taken advantage of. And now I'm alone, and it's my own fault. You're not alone. You have Nathan. You have me. After everything I did? How can you even stand to talk to me? I thought about that. About the funeral she tried to control, the friends she'd kept from Robert, the years of manipulation and isolation. Because you're my daughter. And because I think you're finally starting to understand what you lost. She cried then, really cried. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry for the funeral, for keeping Dad from his friends, for all of it. I thought I was protecting you both, but I was just protecting myself from having to share you. I know. Can I come over? I don't want to be alone right now. Of course. She came over that night and we talked until 3 in the morning. really talked for the first time in years. She told me about her marriage falling apart, about the pressure she'd felt to be perfect, to control everything. I told her about the scholarship fund, about reconnecting with Robert's friends, about learning to live without him. I wish I could apologize to Dad, she said. So do I. But you can honor him by learning from this. By being the person he always believed you could be. It's been 2 years since Robert died. Claire and I have lunch every week now. She's in therapy working through her need to control everything. She's started volunteering at the community center where Robert used to teach English. She's building her own relationships with Anne and David, trying to repair what she broke. She'll never be the daughter Robert deserved, but she's trying to be better. And that's something. Last week was the anniversary of Robert's death. We held a memorial service at the high school, and this time Claire helped plan it. She invited everyone, sent personal notes to Robert's old friends, made sure the service celebrated who he really was. More than 200 people came. Claire stood up and spoke about her father, about the mistakes she'd made, about what she'd learned. My father believed that family was bigger than blood, she said. He believed in showing up for people, in giving without expecting anything back. I didn't understand that when he was alive. I tried to make him smaller to fit him into my narrow definition of what mattered. I was wrong. After the service, Anne hugged Claire. Your father would be proud of you today. Claire cried. I don't deserve that. None of us deserve grace, Anne said. But we receive it anyway. That's what Robert taught us. I watched my daughter embrace the woman she'd once turned away, and I thought about Robert. About his big, generous heart, his terrible jokes, his absolute faith that people were worth loving even when they disappointed you. He was right about that. He was right about everything. My daughter's text said, family only, and she regretted it when she saw how many people considered themselves Robert's family. But the real regret came later, when she realized she'd spent years trying to shrink his world, when she should have been learning to expand her own. Some lessons come too late. But some come just in time to change who we become. I still miss Robert every day. But I'm grateful for the funeral that went wrong. For the doors that opened. For all the people who showed up to remind me that love isn't something you control or manage or keep clean and simple. Love is messy and complicated and bigger than any plan. Robert knew that. And finally, so do I.